Sand under the foreskin is one of the most painful medical conditions imaginable.
Imagine a man so tough he could smash a rugby scrum, drink half a pub under the table, and then sneak in behind enemy lines to blow up an entire airfield, all before breakfast. That was Lieutenant Colonel Robert Blair Paddy Mayne. Soldier, scholar, sportsman, an absolute menace to the German Luftwaffe. You might know him from the BBC series SAS Rogue Heroes, where he is depicted as a common man, unhinged, hard-drinking, unpredictable, and a wild card. But behind the myth was a far more complex man. Disciplined, intelligent, and quietly haunted by what he'd seen. So grab a brew, settle in, and let's separate fact from fiction, because the real Paddy Mayne didn't need exaggeration. The truth was already unbelievable enough. This is the story of the rogue hero.
Mother, what's your excuse for being such a mad fucker?
I don't need a fucking excuse.
Born in 1915 in Newtownards, in Northern Ireland, if the nickname Paddy didn't already give that away. He grew up in Northern Ireland and had that quiet, stubborn streak you find in people who end up changing history. His family were rather wealthy, being merchants and landowners, very divorced from the depiction that you see in the show.
Considering your humble background.
Raised by men like you. Landowning gentry. Life as a common man, he said.
He was incredibly intelligent. He studied law at Queen's University Belfast and could have had a perfectly reasonable career in courtrooms and clubhouses. But then again, there's not much adventure in filling out paperwork. And Paddy preferred hitting people, legally, on the rugby pitch. He played for Ulster and Ireland, and even went on a British Lions tour, and stories of him on that tour are wild. Accounts of his behaviour there include smashing up hotel rooms, drunken brawling with dock workers, freeing a convict he had befriended, and dumping the carcass of an antelope on the floor of his hotel following the midnight hunting session he'd had. When war broke out in 1939, Mayne traded his rugby boots for an officer's commission, and joined the Royal Artillery before transferring to the Royal Ulster Rifles. That didn't quite suit him either. Too much shouting, not enough doing. So he volunteered for the Commandos, Britain's new experiment. And there he found his calling. He was daring, clever, and slightly terrifying. He first saw action during the Syrian campaign, where he showed real leadership, successfully leading a section of men during the Battle of Litani River, capturing a boatload of prisoners in the process. His career takes a slight detour after this, however, as he apparently flattened his commanding officer after a disagreement, which in fairness is one way to end an argument. Oh, and that disagreement was due to his commanding officer apparently shooting Paddy's dog, which is a dick move. I'm with Paddy on this one, to be honest. He was locked up for it, and that could have been the end of his career, but fate, or more precisely David Stirling, had other plans. Stirling, a Scottish officer with a broken back and a wild idea. He was forming a tiny secret unit to parachute behind enemy lines and blow up planes, a Special Air Service.
The SAS.
Or, as it was known at the time, L Detachment Special Air Service Brigade. He had heard of an Irish commando sitting in a military jail for punching his commanding officer, and thought, perfect, that's exactly the sort of man I need. Stirling got him released and recruited him, which began one of the greatest military partnerships of the war. The first SAS raid in North Africa was frankly a disaster. Half the men got lost, most of the equipment vanished, and several were captured or killed before firing a shot. Paddy was among the few who actually made it to the ground in one piece. The mission had failed badly, but Paddy wasn't the kind of man who gave up. So instead of packing it in, he and David Stirling changed tactics. They'd raid by jeep, using the long-range desert group as guides, and that's where Mayne came alive. His first successful raid at Tamet Airfield, where he led a handful of men into a German airfield under the cover of darkness. They infiltrated it, calmly setting explosive under the wings, and then, when the first charges went off, unleashed every gun they had. When the smoke cleared, Mayne had personally destroyed over 20 aircraft. Not bad for a night's work. That success marked the real birth of the SAS. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Order for this operation.
Be awarded the Distinguished Service Order Medal and be promoted to the rank of captain.
On the night of July 26, 1942, Mayne led what would become the most successful SAS raid of the entire Desert War, commanding a force of just 18 heavily armoured jeeps, a mix of British and Free French commandos. He launched a surprise assault on the Sidi Haneish airfield. Moving silently across the sands, they caught the Germans completely off guard. Within minutes, the airfield erupted in flames, up to 40 enemy aircraft destroyed in a single, devastating strike. After Stirling was captured in 1943, Mayne took command of the SAS. They expanded and evolved from desert raiders into one of the most effective special forces in history. By the end of the North African campaign, Paddy himself was credited with destroying over 100 aircraft. When the war moved to Italy, so did Paddy Mayne, and now his battle-hardened SAS. The desert was gone, replaced by mountains, mud, and much less room to drive jeeps around like cowboys. The SAS had to evolve again, smaller, stealthier teams, often operating alongside partisans and local resistance groups. Italy was a different kind of fight, less glamour, more grit. In one operation in Termoli in late 1943, Mayne led his men through enemy lines to sabotage communications and supply routes. The terrain was brutal, the weather worse, and yet Paddy Mayne's calmness never wavered. He was awarded the Bar for his Distinguished Service Order for the defence of Augusta. It was also in Italy where he met the famous Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. When inspecting the SAS, Montgomery noticed Mayne wasn't wearing his new maroon beret, but his old sand-coloured one.
You appear to be wearing the wrong beret, Major Mayne.
I don't think I am, sir.
You have my personal permission to carry on wearing your sand-coloured beret.
By 1944, Mayne and the SAS were operating in France after D-Day, raiding behind German lines to disrupt reinforcements and communications. The raids were fast, brutal, and incredibly dangerous. In August 1944, Mayne led a team deep into enemy-occupied territory, ambushing convoys and blowing up supply dumps. It's here he would yet again earn another Distinguished Service Order. His citation reads, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Blair Mayne had commanded the 1st SAS Regiment through the period of operations in France. On 8th August 1944, he was dropped into Operation Hounsworth Base, located west of Dijon, in order to coordinate and take charge of available detachments of his regiment and to coordinate their attacks with a major airborne landing, which was then envisaged near Paris. He then proceeded in a jeep in daylight to motor to the game base, making the complete journey in one day. On the approach of Allied forces, he passed through the lines in his jeep to contact the American forces, and to lead back through the lines, his detachment of 20 jeeps landed for Operation Wallace. During the next few weeks, he successfully penetrated the German and American lines on 4 occasions. In order to lead parties of reinforcements, it was entirely due to Lieutenant Colonel Mayne's fine leadership and example, and his utter disregard for danger that the unit was able to achieve such striking success. And then came Germany. In one of his final actions in April 1945, Mayne drove a jeep deep through enemy lines to rescue trapped comrades. He single-handedly cleared a German position with a Bren gun and grenades, saving dozens of men. It was this act that many said should have earned him the Victoria Cross. But due to standard practice apparently, he was only given the 3rd bar to his Distinguished Service Order. Standard practice? Or bureaucracy? Politics? Or just the fact that Mayne had always been a bit of a thorn in the army's side? Still, his men knew who the hero was, medals or not. By the end of the war, Mayne had become one of Britain's most decorated soldiers. He'd gained 4 Distinguished Service Orders, which is practically unheard of. There was talk of him receiving the Victoria Cross again in 2005. But for reasons still baited today, the government never reopened the case. Whatever the case, he was a hero to those who actually fought beside him, and that probably mattered to him more than medals ever did, or the opinions of those
Landowning, gentrified, boy-buggering toffs.
But when the war ended, things got harder. The adrenaline, the camaraderie, the purpose, all gone. He returned to Northern Ireland, where he worked as a solicitor, but could not return to his beloved sport of rugby due to back pains. He grew quieter, more withdrawn, preferred books to spending time with people, which people forgot that side of him. The thinker, the philosopher, the poet, the man who saw too much and couldn't quite forget it. But in 1955, tragedy struck. Mayne died in a car accident at just 40 years old, his Land Rover crashing near his home in Newtownards. He was said to have been extremely drunk whilst driving. He left behind a legacy of bravery, mystery, and the kind of stories soldiers would tell for decades. Today there's a statue of him in his hometown, and debates still rage as to whether he should have received the Victoria Cross. There are petitions linked below if you would like to try and help him receive one. The Rogue Hero series introduced him to a new audience, portraying him as a larger-than-life force of nature. Which, to be fair, he was.
Like someone's going to come in here and they're going to slit your throat.
They are welcome to try.
And the show heavily stereotypes him.
Prefer poachine, distilled in bathtubs.
But behind the whiskey, the fists, and the desert dust was a man of intellect, courage, and deep humanity. So, yes, Paddy Mayne could drink, fight, and blow up more planes than an entire air force. He helped found and build the SAS into one of the most notorious and incredible regiments in history. In other words, don't believe all the myths, but don't underestimate the man either. He is Irish after all. If you enjoyed this dive into one of the many rogue heroes and want to hear more real stories behind the legends, hit like, subscribe, and let me know who you'd like to see next. Because sometimes history doesn't need a rewrite, it just needs to be told properly.